Hello everyone, Jasmine is back with the Kingdom Hearts theory. Just the other day, Kingdom Hearts Union Cross had a major update that had about, I think, 4 or 5 different cutscenes. And within these cutscenes, there was a lot of information presented that was confirming to some of my previous theories, kind of clarified some of my previous theories as well, and also raised other questions about the future directions that the Kingdom Hearts series will go. So let's dive straight in and start with the cutscene, The Purpose. Now in this cutscene called The Purpose, we see the Master of Masters is having a discussion with one of the Darknesses, and he's asking him, what is your plan with this world? And he begins that when twilight ends, a new day begins. I've determined that this world is comprised of 3 stages. And he goes into the different, pretty much all the different games. So Kingdom Hearts Unchained, Kingdom Hearts Union Cross that we have now, and whichever one was in between the first one, but all different Kingdom Hearts Union Cross games. And so they were essentially put into this world to fight off the darkness, and if they couldn't, which they weren't expected to, at least gain the ability to pass on to others. And of course, Master Masters always has other plans in mind, so this is when he starts going into his discussion of the purpose of the Book of Prophecies. Now, of course, Darkness is trying to figure out his master plan, and, assuming that the Master Masters knows everything due to the contents of the Book of Prophecies, but he explains that how the book is written is through the events that he's able to see, so not everything is in this book. And that, of course, anything that Luxord in his Keyblade observed is the only content really in the book. So, of course, there's holes, there's missing information, there's things that he doesn't know, but he can get a gist of what's going to happen. But his main purpose was to create waypoints for the future. And, of course, Dark is asking, what do you mean by this? And essentially, he's saying that when you travel to the future using the Ark, you lose your body, but you have to have a medium and someone who has memories of the person in order to restore that person in whatever vessel they come up with in the future. So that's how you're able to time travel through the future. And so he explains that, of course, Luxord will provide the memories since he's been observing everyone up until this point, and that his Keyblade will be the medium that can take their hearts and give them a vessel. And, of course, since it's seen different points in times, these people can obtain vessels or, be recompleted at different points in time. Of course, again, Master Master is explaining that this is not just his final goal in terms of him going into the future, but he's also expecting others to follow, and this is what the 7 pods in the Ark and 7 crowns come into a discussion. And he explains that they are the 7 lights. Now, of course, Master Masters being the Master Master is saying, who knows if Luxord and his apprentice are the 7 lights. I guess he's including himself in that as well. But he's, waiting to find out what will happen, who will use the pods to travel into the future, which is interesting because, one pod was used by Maleficent, so, and she's definitely not liked. I keep talking, and of course, then at this point he's saying he saw something in the future that caught his eye. And again, this point is really interesting because he says it's a world even I cannot know. And of course, the world that comes to everyone's mind now is Quadratum, that is part of the fake world. Some of the major points from this video I wanted to highlight connects back to the main concept or the main theory that may your heart be your guiding key. And this is the sole purpose of many of the Keyblade wielders, and a motto that's said over and over again to each of the 7 lights essentially. And One of the things that Master said is when all 7 of the arc pods depart, this world will end, which is something, of course, we know and we have seen in Kingdom Hearts 3 when you go to Scala ad Caelum, figuring out that Scala ad Caelum actually is, I guess, like the last stage or the most recent stage of Daybreak Town. And you see in Remind specifically that you come to this mechanism that shows Daybreak Town. It shows it ruined in the middle and then how it becomes Scala ad Caelum. So that's something that's already predicted. And as Master said, it's already written. And even Darkness says it too in another cutscene we'll discuss soon. And then for the Master of Masters, his main purpose for the Book of Prophecies was to create waypoints, and also sending his apprentice Luxord into the future with his Keyblade are 2 of the mechanisms that are, well, 3. So the Book of Prophecies, the Keyblade, and Luxord are 3 mechanisms the Masters plans on using to travel into the future. And of course, it's not just him. He's also seeing who else will depart on these arcs and travel to the future. And not just at a certain point in time, but since the Book of Prophecies provides different waypoints, this could suggest that the people that use the arc may all go to different time periods, may go to the same, some may go to the same, some may go to different ones. But I'm leaning towards that, if you know my previous videos in terms of where people ended up and how they got there. The order, of course, is still up for debate, but that seems like that's the direction that they're going. Another point presented is that the Master of Masters is nurturing new lights to defeat the darkness in the future, using Data Daybreak Town. So, of course, with Ephemer, Skuld, Lauriam, Brain, Ventus, even like Strelitzia, all of them, they are being trained to pass on their powers to a new generation as they head into the future, which again, this brings in connections that we're starting to see now between, especially between Brain and Ericus, and possibly Skuld and Lay and Issa and Radiant Garden. And there may be even more interactions we're not even aware of, because again, we still have Kingdom Hearts Dark Road occurring, and there's plenty more cutscenes to come from that game as well. And then finally, again, which I already touched on, was the 7 crowns, 7 lights, traveling at different points in time. And of course, the last thing that the Masters mention is that in the future he can see a world even he cannot conceive or cannot know. It was interesting with Kingdom Hearts Insider. The first day the cutscenes came out, they had slightly different translations than the ones that I just recorded for this video, but essentially, pretty much most of the content was the same. It just kind of changed a little bit of slang and that kind of stuff. But other than that, I just wanted to point that out. So if some of the things that I say are not directly said in these videos, it's because I'm just basing it off of the first translation that Kingdom Hearts Insider had uploaded. But anyway, so that's the first cutscene, the purpose. So then let's continue on to the next cutscene, the World's End. The End of the World, or the World's End cutscene, is the longest cutscene that came out of this update, and it gives us a lot of new information, or a continuation of the discussion they were having prior to their fight with Darkness. So at this point, everyone is pretty much defeated besides Ephemer. Brain's still upright at least, but everybody else is pretty much laid out on the floor. And so Ephemer and Brain are having a discussion with Darkness about, are they done fighting? Are they going to keep fighting? Are you going to surrender? That kind of thing. And of course, the Darkness is not going to surrender. What is surrendering to the Darkness? They want the Darkness to surrender to them, But anyway, so they keep having a conversation, talking about what their goal is, like what is on their mind. You have to have some type of purpose. You have to have some type of will. It's like you just don't act for no reason type of thing. But they're still trying to keep understanding what the Darkness and what their plan is and what the reasoning behind it is, their motives and all that. And so Darkness eventually says infection. And of course, they're like, what are you talking about? You care to elaborate on this? And he says that data is transmitted through electrical signals, and that the same goes for the hearts and minds of you humans. An entire world made of those signals should not be underestimated. In fact, I've proven to be a very favorable environment for darkness to thrive in and spread. And is that why he slipped into the data world and hid inside Ven, is what Brain asks Darkness. And he said that this was already decided. It wasn't his decision to make. Finally, Skuld wakes back up. She seems to be okay. And she says, makes a discussion about the Book of Prophecies, but she still won't forgive Darkness's actions when it comes to Ven, and of course killing Strelitzia. And then at this point, all three of them are still having a conversation, and they're up on their feet again, ready to take Darkness out. And he says, we are many and you are one, but to remain as one requires will. By assimilating him, talking about Ven, we could separate into pure darkness, turning me into a single entity with my own will. So he essentially becomes his own type of person, and he says it was a necessary sacrifice for this to occur. Now Lauriam's up, of course, here in the whole discussion. He mentions Strelitzia again in terms of why she had to be killed, and of course now he's up ready to fight, go for round 2. And Darkness saying it'll make no difference, but then out of a portal of light jumps the player, whatever you choose the person to look like. And they join in the fray, so now it's 5 against 1. But Darkness says it's futile, and even if you do manage to defeat him, that this world will still end. But Lauriam's like, nah, we will win. And of course, he says, how do you plan on getting back to the real world using the Ark? And Lauriam says yes, like Maleficent did, or the witch as he calls her. And Darkness says, you know nothing. Which again kind of sounds like Ansem Seeker Darkest in Kingdom Hearts 1. Anyway, even if you make it back to the real world, Daybreak Town will be consumed by the darkness. And Ephemer wonders if the darkness is also in the real world and not just in the data world. And he's saying that the darkness is supposed to be sealed within this world once the initiation process occurred by the Ark pods departing the data world. And it was kind of fail-safe if they couldn't defeat the darkness in this battle they're talking about currently right now. So when it's used, it activates a system designed to seal the darkness, as I said. And with Maleficent's departure was the starting event of this. And of course, again, what he said, this will lead to darkness consuming the real world anyway. And Lauriam's like, oh, we're just a sacrifice from the start. And Ephemer says he doesn't believe that. Because of course, he always admired immensely Lady Ava. And that she was the one that orchestrated the coming together, or the formation of the Dandelions. And so Ephemer doesn't think that Ava would just throw away their lives like that. And so here, Brain is saying that they believe in their leader Ava, and that they will continue to fight darkness, no matter if the world will end or not. And that's where this cutscene leaves off. Reviewing this cutscene, obviously a lot of points were mentioned in terms of what the fate of this world, what's going on with the Ark, what's going on with darkness kind of creating its own will, and then also about the idea of data transfer and how darkness is spreading within this data world and in the real world, it seems like, too. So one of the major points I want to highlight from this cutscene again ties back to one of my earlier videos about the concept of making a nobody a somebody, in which we're seeing most recently in the later Kingdom Hearts games, of course, like Kingdom Hearts 2 and really in Kingdom Hearts 3, and Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, of course, because that's where it all started. And the idea of the replica program, where you're creating a person by putting another's memories, heart data, whatever, inside a vessel. And from Kingdom Hearts 3, then we have this concept of a data chip, which is creating a heart by compiling data on emotions. And this may be what's put inside a newer type of replica type of vessel that they're using, possibly to bring back like Naminé and Xion and Roxas and all of them. And of course, we've learned from Kingdom Hearts backstory, I think for Unicross, that Keyblades are made from extracting or materializing them from people's hearts. So again, data, hearts, memories, all that is highly connected into, of course, who a person is. But it seems like this cutscene is really highlighting that this data, whatever makes a person can be transferred, can be manipulated, can be infested by darkness. And so again, what darkness said in this cutscene is that that darkness can ride on the signals and data and in the hearts and minds of humans. And in this next cutscene I will show, called A Seed of Light, we see that darkness is actually checking on the data that they're collecting on the from the computer. And of course, this data is on the Keyblade wielders that are currently in the data version of Daybreak Town. And so again, this contributes to my idea of the fates that will be bestowed upon these dandelions as they use the arc to travel to the future, and as the data is collected and who it will be transferred to. And is this the main method that the Master of Masters had mentioned in the previous cutscene of how new Keyblade wielders will arise and be primed to fight the darkness at a different point in time. So again, of course, we'll revisit this idea as we cover the next cutscene, which is much shorter, which is nice, called A Seed of Light. So in this next cutscene, we have darkness in the room that contains the Ark. We can see that one pod has left, and there are six still there. Now he's saying he's looking at what's happening to the data on the other side. And another person walks in carrying a white robed or cloaked figure. He walks over to darkness, and again we get a nice panel of the room showing how many pods are left and what's going on in the real world. And he or she's asking darkness, like, I thought you guys were supposed to be a whole, have you guys split off, what's going on? And he's surprised to see him, as no Keyblade Master should be left in this world, and he asks, who are you? Of course, being cryptic, he says a holdover, whatever that's supposed to mean. But he says, oh, Lushu, which again makes sense because he's just lingering around. But then he says, goes to show you that you don't read the Book of Prophecies, you won't get the full picture. So again, he's saying something cryptic to darkness. I don't know if he's suggesting that he's not Lushu or not, but I'm pretty sure that it is Lushu. Whatever. And he asks him, why are you here? And you were only meant to observe. So again, that's Lushu's goal. So our task, given to him. And he says, I'm here, or should I say our teacher and the master told me to watch over them, and if I was worried, not to meddle. So essentially to look but don't touch. But he said, like, the master was uncommon of him. He was very straight in his directions. So he thinks now he knows what he actually meant for him to do. And so he opens up the middle pod, and Darkness thinks that Lushu's going to jump into it himself, but he says it's not for me. Of course, essentially, he's going to use this pod to place this white-robed figure inside, and Darkness is just, idly sitting by and watching, see what he's doing, and he's asking, what is that? Because, of course, we can't see what it is. It looks like a rope to us, but he says, a seed of light to be sown into the future, the true dandelion. So, of course, now this raises the question, who is this true dandelion? So this cutscene is very revealing about the current situation. As you can see, compared to the last cutscene, because now, again, we're back in this arc room that is showing that one pod had departed, and that's the one that Maleficent had used after her fight with Lauriam, as pictured in the bottom left of this image. It's also interesting, of course, during their fight, it seemed like this middle pod that was used to move this white robe was damaged. So I guess at some point in between there, that the pod was repaired, maybe by Darkness, maybe by Lucius, somebody had repaired it. Or it gives the possibility that there may even oddly be two different sets of pods in the data world and in the real world. I don't think that's the case, but it'll be interesting to see if there's actually more pods than we think that can be used, or the pods in the data world are different than the pods in the real world. But I think this is all occurring in the same place, in the same room, because again, with this cutscene, we see that the pod that Maleficent used is gone. So the only difference is that the pod was, whatever that pod that got damaged in their fight, was fixed. But, it's just an idea that maybe there's two separate sets of pods. But, again, it may not be the case. But, of course, knowing that two of these pods are gone now and that there's only 5 left. And if you think about all the major characters that are, come forth in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, thinking about where the characters are in the future, between, you have Ephemer, Skuld, Brain, Ven, Lauriam, the player, and then, even thinking about Elrena, like how does she get out of this world? How does she end up in Organization 13 with Lauriam? We're having 7 people that possibly will need to use these pods, but we only have 5 pods left. So it will be interesting to see who ends up using the pods or not, who will get left behind. I would think Lauriam and Elrena will probably stay behind, and maybe that's how they ended up in an organization, like joining around the same time because they stayed together, would be my guess. And then of course Brain, Ephemer, Skuld, the player, and Brain, Ephemer, Skuld, the player. I'm missing somebody. Somebody else will go along with them. But so yes, I would think those 5 will continue on to the future. But again, we have this idea of the 7 crowns, 7 light, pass on to new generations to defeat the darkness once they depart from the Data Daybreak Town idea. And it seems that maybe you have these new lights in the real world that will carry over to maybe the people probably in Dark World, and then carry over again until, of course, our current time with Sora and his friends. And that maybe these old lights ended up in the fictional world with the Master of Masters, since in that first cutscene he had mentioned that he intended to travel to the future with other lights. To expand on that last point, as you see in these following images, we again have this reiteration of 7 lights, 7 important people from the past, or 7 main figures in a lot of the main installments for Kingdom Hearts. In this image, you can see that it seemed to have started with Master of Masters and the 6 apprentices that were the 7 probably lights at the time that he came into Daybreak Town to essentially initiate everything, all the future events that's going to occur in the Book of Prophecies, and start his plan in terms of how to get to these different points and how to get to those places and those different points in time, and really get a grip of what's going on, and of course add on to his master plan in terms of what he wants to do as his end game, as his end goal. And so then it would seem the next generation were the dandelions that he had Alpha set up. So that would be Lauriam, at least the dandelions that we see would be Strelitzia, Lauriam, Elrena, Brain, Ephemer, Skuld, Ven. Oh, no. Okay, no, that's what I was missing. Ven. Yes, very important. Ven and the player. So since Strelitzia is slain and again, which I'll get into a little bit later. She may or may not be the one in the pod, and maybe Ava, maybe Ven. We've seen him in that state before. I'm not entirely sure, but whatever the case, it would seem like these maybe such Elrena with Strelitzia, but those are the 7 lights of this current era. And then, of course, the next era we would go to is kind of a mesh between Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep and, of course, the regular Kingdom Hearts game, in which we have the 7 main lights being Terra, Aqua, Riku, Sora, Kairi, Ven again, because he just keeps coming back, and then Mickey. And so with this, the main thing I wanted to point out is that it seems like to me that the Kingdom Hearts, that especially in this update specifically, that a lot of things are pointing towards a connection, a very strong connection between Ava and Kairi. And so this raises the question, of course, going back to these pods and who's going to use them, who stays and who goes. And we already know from Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memories that Yensid had mentioned Keyblade Masters were known to cross over into another world, and that Xehanort looked more deeply into that world, and that the Keyblade Masters that he's mentioning are probably the Dandelions. I wouldn't think it's the Lost Masters. So, he's probably not referring to, Era and all of them. I mean, he could be talking about all of the Keyblade Masters collectively. Since it's essentially been a lot, so maybe they actually did know about the Lost Masters as well. But again, it seemed like they at some point crossed over into the fake world, into Yozora's world. And for me, I believe a lot of them are still there. So in terms of people probably using the pod, would definitely be Skuld and Brain, and probably Ephemer. Because again, we see Skuld is probably Subject X, and she ended up in Radiant Garden at some point and interacted with Isa and Lei. And I don't know if it was before or after, but then she probably ended up in the fictional world and kind of is sharing a vessel, or stole the vessel of the girl of Yozora's world. While we have Brain, again, which we're seeing him wielding Ericus's Keyblade, and we know that Ericus had a grandfather. Now that we know that Ericus had a grandfather that was an original master, or he's a blue blood or pure blood or whatever Xehanort had called him. And so now we have that connection with Brain to someone in the real world or in Sora's world in the future. So again, like Skuld, at some point he went to that point in time and probably set in motion the next generation of Keyblade wielders in Dark Road. And then at some point, either before or after, probably after, I guess, would end up in the fictional world, and he may share a body with the guy pictured in the lower right with the hat in Yozora's world. While Ephemer, the only evidence of Ephemer we saw in Sora's world was at the Keyblade Graveyard when he was helping him defeat that big old, pretty much heartless ball of shadows, or whatever you want to call it, heartless wave, I think that's what it's called. But so that's the only evidence of Ephemer we have in that world. But I would say Ephemer is probably sharing a body with Yozora, of course, in Quadratum. So I would think those 3 would definitely use the arc. An idea I had presented a couple videos ago is that the player may indeed be Demyx, and again, the player is there fighting. They are part of the fray. And if it is Demyx, again, that would give him a major role, and it would explain, again, how he gets to the future. Again, we don't know much about Demyx, but we do know that he ended up in an organization, and he is connected to the ancient Keyblade War, as Xehanort had pointed out. So again, if Demyx is a player, I would think the player also would use a pod to travel to the future. Of course, Ven, we know Ven is very important because he's in Birth by Sleep, he's in the Age of Fairy Tales, he's in, the future of regular Kingdom Hearts, and associated with Sora and Roxas and Ventus everywhere. So I would assume Van would end up in one of the arcs as well. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, I said that Lauriam probably would stay behind because he probably wouldn't want to leave Elrena, and however they get out the data world, however that happens, maybe a dark corridor opens up for them and they're traveled into the future and to a point in time that they are recruited to the organization members. Maybe that's what's occurring. And so, yeah, so Brain, Ephemer, Skuld, Ven, and the player, I think, are the ones that are going to go into the arc. And Lauriam will stay behind with Elrena. Going back to who Luxord, or presumably Luxord, put inside one of the arcs, this white-robed figure, two people will come to mind. Of course, Strelitzia, because we have seen her in a white-robed figure before, and then, but also Ava, since he says a true dandelion, and Ava was the original dandelion. She's the one that put the dandelions together. But again, true dandelion could be associated with both of them, because Strelitzia was supposed to be a union leader, and she is a true dandelion. Now here, I suggest for Ava that she was put into the arc because maybe she was sent to the future right after Luxord and her were fighting, because we don't know how the fight ended. We don't know the fate of Ava after their encounter, so maybe he's the one that's sending her in the arc now. The Master of Masters did say that she was their hope to have the light survive. And again, this is something that was said to another important character in the future. And of course, this character being Kyrie, and there's this suggestion that maybe Ava could be Kyrie's grandmother. Or at least they reside in the same body, or they share the same heart. So the idea that I had presented in, I think it was my Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memories video, is that Ava's heart is inside Kyrie. And again, that the Master of Masters told Ava that she may be the only hope to save the light from expiring, while Xehanort said the same thing to Kyrie in Melody of Memories. So this is the Xehanort in Radiant Garden, so the scientist one. And it would be interesting that if Naminé gets her look, or her blonde hair or whatever from Ava, so it's kind of like the same thing with Ben and Sora sharing a heart. You get Roxas, but then you also have Ventus. So you have Ventus look like Sora, and Roxas look like Ventus. Whatever's going on there. But then now you have Ava sharing a heart with Kyrie, and then that's how you get Naminé. In terms of Ava's importance, whatever her mission was, maybe she was the one sent in the arc. And also, if you remember that at the end of Kingdom Hearts 3, he does say to the other Lost Masters that Ava had a mission of her own. So maybe he was the one that kind of sort of gave her this mission by sending her off in the arc. So I think that would make a lot of sense in terms of Ava possibly being this white robe figure. But of course, the other possibility, and it seems to be the more obvious, is that it's Strelitzia, and maybe, I don't know why they would go through essentially such a long process to explain how Strelitzia got into the future. So for me, the only idea would be, like, if you put her in the arc, that this was the main purpose of Ven slaying Strelitzia, so they will be able to send her heart, her light, into the future. Because one of the main things that we do see when Strelitzia is slain, we see her heart flying up into the sky or whatnot. So maybe at some point, Luxord had saved or captured her heart and put inside this vessel and sent her to the future. An idea I'll reintroduce now that this cutscene actually provided great clarification on is this encounter or conflict between a strong light and a strong darkness. Of course, this is something that we see with Strelitzia being slain by darkness when he possessed Ventus. So as a result of this encounter, we have this being that we see in Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, which fights alongside Marluxia. And if you look at the figure, of course, it's a female who is hooded in a robe. And again, we've already seen Strelitzia in this form. So this would lead probably most to believe that the specter that fights along Marluxia is Strelitzia, and she was able to gain this form through her being slain by darkness, since she's such a strong light. The specter, I guess, can be considered a nobody, so maybe even Strelitzia is an original nobody, so that's something to also consider as well. The world-ending cutscene was much appreciated because it gave clarification to my idea of this clash or encounter between a pure light and a pure darkness, or a strong light and a strong darkness, an idea I had presented in the Kingdom Hearts Dark World theory in terms of looking at the transformation of the brown robed figure from Kingdom Hearts 1 to becoming Ansem, Seeker of Darkness, the main boss of Kingdom Hearts 1, right? And so what I had suggested is that Xehanort's Heartless is Ansem, Seeker of Darkness, right? But it had to possess a strong light, it had to possess Riku in order to gain a form. And so this is something that Darkness mentions in this cutscene, that Ven had to be that conduit, that medium used to gain its own will, while Ven in return is saying, well, if you can do that, I can be that light that will gain you a form that we can defeat. So again, that's an idea that we're seeing a lot in the Kingdom Hearts series. If you really look at it in terms of a strong light and a strong darkness clashing, giving a form to an enemy that they can defeat. And of course, a lot of these enemies are part of the 13 darknesses that are happening in Sora's reiteration of the Keyblade War between the 7 lights and the 7 darknesses. Riku and the brown robed figure crossed paths, and then this gave form to Ansem, Seeker of Darkness. And since Ansem, Seeker of Darkness is the Heartless of Xehanort, this also would carry over to giving form, I guess you could still say, to the nobody of Xehanort, or aka Xemnas. Then you also have this encounter between Terra and Master Xehanort, in which Master Xehanort put his heart inside Terra's body for a younger vessel, and then we get Terra Xehanort with Xehanort's will primarily controlling Terra's body, and Terra's locked inside the Guardian Heartless that we see first around Ansem, Seeker of Darkness, but now in Kingdom Hearts 3 is around Terra Xehanort more so. And of course, this begs the question with Kingdom Hearts Dark Road now, saying that Xehanort is going to choose to wield the darkness. We know that he's going down the dark path. And of course, we have Baldur here, which is probably the best representation of light of that time. I still like the idea that these two will probably clash. If not the final boss fight, it's definitely going to be a major boss fight, and that this clash maybe produce another darkness that might not necessarily carry over to the darknesses that we see in Sora's reiteration of the Keyblade War, but maybe will carry over into future installments in terms of what's going on in Yozora's world. So again, I hope Xehanort was, because again, Jens had said that Xehanort was aware of the fake world, so maybe some entity they produced ended up in the fake world. But that would be interesting, instead of my idea that Ephemer and Yozora are connected. Maybe maybe Yozora is connected to Xehanort as well, and Baldur. Never know. But I'm sure if they do clash, they'll produce some type of dark entity, dark form that they would have to fight. And if they do, and that is produced, maybe that will be the final boss fight for Kingdom Hearts Dark Road. We'll just have to wait and see. But continuing on with this idea, now we have... So if you think back, those kind of all relate to Master Xehanort, kind of Riku. They're around Riku and Terra, but now we have that strong connection between a strong light of Ven interacting with darkness. And this again happens in multiple games of people connected to Ven, such as Sora, and of course their nobody Roxas, and then trying to think again where Kingdom Hearts is going in the future, looking at Yozora's world. So we have the original clash between Ven and Darkness. We see now in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, and the form that he'll probably give him is Ventus. He'll probably be the helmet form that we first saw him in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, because I guess the main suggestion is that Ventus didn't get the look of Sora until their hearts merged or something along that line. But so that will probably be the result of Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, this class currently going on. And then in Kingdom Hearts 358 Days divided by 2, we have Ven essentially, I don't know, not really clashing with the darkness, but since he is part of Organization 13, he's kind of in with the darkness and their whole setup of creating Xion, and that becomes the final boss fight for that game. And Xion originally was darkness that got turned over to light side, so that would still align with that idea as well. And the only one that's kind of out there interesting, if you've noticed it, when you play Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, when Sora is in that deep sleep and kind of being controlled by the dark side, it seems that he produced this nightmare, this I think they called a black coat or anti-black coat figure that Riku actually had to fight. So again, with this light and dark interaction, you're getting these different boss fights, these different entities that the seven lights are fighting. And of course, last but not least, we have Yozora, who will probably encounter a great darkness, and this may be the boss for that world once we venture into Quadratum in future games. To tie this concept of a strong light and a strong darkness giving form to each other, we have another cutscene coming up called Our Plan, in which we have the Master of Masters and Luxord discussing the black box. This conversation picks up where they left off in terms of the Master of Masters saying that Luxord needs to stay out of sight with the box, and that he needs to use his Keyblade with the eye to see the events of the future, and that he has to pick the right time in terms of leaving this world and going into the future. Of course, what's in the box, it's a secret, and well, you'll see the thing is, you can never ever open it. Of course, we want to open the box, right? Great. Now I really want to know. Like all of us really, really, really want to know, but you're not telling us. But anyway, so he said, I'll indulge you, but the secret stays between the two of us, and you are to promise never ever to open the box. And of course, Luxord says he promised because he really wants to know what is inside this box, as the rest of us do. Of course, he whispers to him in an audible, without dialogue, so we still don't know exactly what he's saying to him, but Luxord's response is, but why? And the Master says, you'll see. And this is a dialogue we've seen before, but then now Luxord's saying, can't we skip the song and dance, saying, can you get to the point? And of course, Master's being a Master, saying, don't be a buzzkill. But he was saying he would give him a hint because he doesn't want anything to happen to him. And so Luxord gets excited again in terms of what he's going to tell him. He says, the time may come when darkness blots out the sky at daybreak, the ark will depart, and this world will have fulfilled its purpose. Again, stuff we know from other cutscenes. If that happens, see it through to the end. Then take a corridor and make your way to a new world as fast as you can. And he says this world is going to end. Like I said before, right now we have no way to win against the darkness. We need more time to train all those Keyblade wielders, so that someday the Keyblade will be passed on to those chosen to defeat the darkness. The dandelions are the seed of light meant to sow into the future. This world merely exists to hold the darkness back until that day comes, and the sun will set on this dustless dawn. Ugh, tongue twisters. We're going quick too. Anyway, our plan will have succeeded at last. And that's where the cutscene ends off. So it gave us a little bit more information, but then again, it's still not directly telling us what is inside this black box. I myself have proposed many things in the past about what may be inside this black box. But now, based on all of the cutscenes that have came out in this Union Cross update, it would seem that the contents of the black box are pointing towards that the darknesses, however many they may be, probably 13, that are kind of set free on their own now, kind of wandering, may have been sealed within the black box. We do know from the other cutscenes that Darkness had mentioned that this data roll was meant to seal the darkness within it. And so I would think that the seal is probably connected to the black box, that essentially this data world is within that black box, and all the data that has been collected is probably also residing in that black box. So it'll be interesting to see if Luxord follows his instructions or not. We know that at least in the end of Kingdom Hearts 3 that he still has the black box and it hasn't been opened, but I wonder if now that this Keyblade War, or this clash between the 7 Lights and 13 Darknesses, is over and the Lost Masters have returned, that this may be the time to reveal or open the black box. Again, going back to the concept that the main connection between Ventus and Sora is that they have all these interactions with these light and darknesses, and that these 20 people, these 20 entities are actual pieces of the shattered Keyblade, and that this, part of a larger whole or greater whole they keep mentioning is that Keyblade is that way to the true Kingdom Hearts. And Kingdom Hearts was highly desired for its light, but also Kingdom Hearts has light and darkness within it. So that was a major thing I wanted to kind of touch on from this cutscene again, is what is inside this black box, and that seems to be the case. That would make the most sense, especially if it's kind of symbolizing a Pandora box. That the Pandora box, if you open it, let all the evils out into the world, and so for in terms of their world, their evil are these 13 darknesses that are trying to encounter these strong lights to gain form, not technically gain form, but to gain will and be individuals instead of part of that greater whole. And so yeah, we'll see. I still do like the idea that there may be hearts or data or memories or whatever inside the black box of the original light. So Master of Masters and 6 other people from whatever world the Master of Masters is coming from. I would like to think maybe that was also in the box. But for me, I'd feel like, whatever's sealed in the box is more of a threat than more of a preservation thing. But you never know. It could be another way to preserve the light, and that, if you let it escape at the wrong time, then that might unbalance everything or reverse whatever the Master of Master is trying to accomplish. So that's another route you can go in terms of why he why the Master of Masters doesn't want Luxord to open this box. And so we'll see. But at some point I would think all the pieces come together and reform the Keyblade, and that would be the main fight, conflict, end game, or whatever, to bring Kingdom Hearts back to their world, or the fake world, or both worlds, wherever it needs to be. And yeah, that also kind of goes back to another thought I had in terms of what's going on with Kingdom Hearts. Did Kingdom Hearts, retreat from the Master of Master's childhood world and he's trying to bring it back? Was it stolen into the real world or Sora's world? Was it, or now is he trying to force it into the fake world because he's like, this is the world he said he could not even think of or conceive? So now he's trying to pretty much manipulate this world in whatever way he possibly can to essentially bring Kingdom Hearts into it. So I don't know how much longer the Kingdom Hearts series will go, but we know we're done with the Xehanort arc. So the next arc is probably the Masters arc, and it definitely seems like he's trying some type of plot that deals with Kingdom Hearts, and of course the Keyblade and the 20 pieces of light and darkness that's associated with it. To wrap up this video, I'll kind of leave you with kind of working timeline in terms of what's going on in Kingdom Hearts. And so it would start that the world was born in darkness as it was foretold, and that Kingdom Hearts created light, but these people fought over this light, and as a result of this, the Kingdom Hearts counterpart, the xblade, was shattered into 20 pieces, 7 to light, 13 to dark. And I believe this was all during the Master's childhood, and in whatever world he was originally a part of, and that him and 6 others clashed with 13 darknesses, and this clash, now it seems like expanding on that idea that they were giving each other form, and it was a different form than what they're used to seeing now that we're seeing in Age of Fairy Tales and Swords World and beyond. But it would seem that these 20 individuals are closely linked, as we see that the Masters cause darkness, or other people also refer that to the Master of Masters and Darkness as being friends. So they're again all part of that greater whole. So then after some clash in which they can't defeat each other, the Master of Masters ends up manipulating Daybreak Town to create unions, chooses leaders and Chirithy, and gives Luxord his task in order for him and others to travel into the future using Luxord's memories. His Keyblade is all-seeing eye Keyblade in the book of prophecies that he's writing, as in that whole parallel way of Luxord succeeding and going to the future, and the Master of Masters being able to see everything in the past and writing it down. And so with this, though, of course, we're still saying that through these cutscenes that the world Daybreak Town will fall to ruin due to the people's fear of darkness, but the lights in the hearts of children will restore the world, and these are the Dandelions. So maybe even the ones that don't use the arc that remain in the data world will be transferred to the real world and repopulate the ruined Daybreak Town into what becomes Scarlet Asylum, would be my thought. Currently, we have Master Odin, who teaches 14 Keyblade wielders. 7 go missing, the upperclassmen, as they prepare for the Market Mastery exam, while 6 are sent to find them. So, Master Ericus, Master Xehanort, and their classmates, while 1, named Baldur, is giving a special mission, much like Luxord was giving a special mission by the Master of Masters. So, of course, again, there's a lot of parallels going on in Dark Road compared to Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. So I presented the idea of these, at least how I sort them out, as these 3 world lines in which you have the Age of Fairy Tales, Data Daybreak Town, the Book of Prophecies. You have Sora's World, Ansem's Code, and Jiminy's Journal, Datascape thing. And then your Zora's World now, which is the Fake World, the Grid, and the Master Control Program. Thinking of these 3 places, now knowing that Darkness says that the Master of Masters came to Data Daybreak Town. He had to come from somewhere. So there may be a whole different world separate from Sora's World, from Yozora's World, from the Age of Fairy Tales that the Master of Masters came from. I don't know if it's separate between the real and fake, if it's some in-between world or a whole different world, or it's just an earlier point in time in the Age of Fairy Tales. That's something to be unraveled. Hopefully, well, of course, they'll probably touch on more of this in future Kingdom Hearts games. So again, we'll just have to wait and see. But, of course, I would like to think that the Master of Masters and whoever the 6 he originally fought the darkness with, that one of these 6 is Luxord, and that would give him again another major role. And for whatever reason, maybe he ended up in the fake world, in Quadratum and then traveled to Sora's world. Because again, Luxord seems he's very knowledgeable and knows a lot more. He knows a lot more than he's letting other people know, just like Lushu was doing. But now we know Lushu's role, we know who Lushu is, and of course Lushu even asks Luxord, who are you? So now we're moving into that realm. I think that we're probably going to get a greater connection between Luxord, who he really is, and how he's really connected to Yozora's world, and especially the Master of Masters. So that's what I'm excited about. So again, like I always say, we'll have to wait and see, but these are just the ideas that I have based on previous theories, based on new cutscenes, and what my hope for the Kingdom Hearts franchise, and my hope for the future of the Kingdom Hearts franchise. If you like this video, of course, like, subscribe, comment on any of your thoughts, any of your theories, and I will catch you in the next video. Take care.